Ethel is so shocked and chagrined by life because she doesn't live in reality. So when reality continues to slap her upside the head, even though she's denied its existence all these many years, she's just dumbfounded. Like, what? Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Denise, and today we are going to finally finish The Other Mrs. Kennedy. This has been the longest book I've read on this channel, but it's also been one of the most interesting. It's been riveting from start to finish, and I would love to get my hands on another Jerry Oppenheimer biography. He's written many, although interestingly, I'm not super intrigued by some of the characters that he chose to write about, so I don't know. Although I wouldn't have pegged Ethel Kennedy for being interesting either, so maybe I just need to give some of the other people that he's written about a chance, because obviously he knows how to bring the information in a way that is highly compelling. A bunch of you have given suggestions last episode when I said, I'm not really sure what I'm going to read next. Thank you so much for your suggestions. One that continues to come up is that Andrew Lowney, is it Lowney or Lowney? My apologies to him, I can never remember which one it is. But Andrew Lowney has said that he is writing, and it is due to be published this year, a book about Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. I'm thrilled he chose to write a book about those two. They are insane people, both of them individually insane, but then together. I mean, you want to talk about a meeting in hell. The two of them just seem like they help each other towards each other's worst instincts. So I can't wait for that book to come out, but we don't have a publication date. I just know that it's coming out this year. So I can't just twiddle my thumbs until that book finally comes out. So I'm still in the hunt for something, but don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. You'll see plenty of me in your newsfeed. Okay, let's go ahead and get started on these final two chapters. This chapter is entitled Union Label. And right out the gate, Ethel's acting stupid. The chapter says that flush with her share of proceeds from the sale of Great Lakes Carbon, Ethel, for the first time in years, no longer had to worry about her spending. Her financial nemesis, Steve Smith, suffering from the early stages of cancer, had finally gotten off her back, and Ethel was free to buy a $3,000 jacket from her favorite new designer, Emmanuel Ungaro, without thinking twice. For Ted's 56th birthday party in February 1988, she arrived on a chariot, dressed as Cleopatra. Earlier in the day, as preparations for the party were underway, she galloped into Ted's newly furnished kitchen on a horse, jumped the kitchen table, and tore up some of the new floor tiles. And she let out a whoop. "Don't you think this is just great?" Ted didn't. To old friends who were present, Ethel hadn't changed much since her horseback ride to the big house on Lake Avenue almost a half-century before. 2 months after Ted's birthday bash, Ethel marked a major milestone, her own 60th, by throwing a glitzy party for some 200 friends that brought back fond memories of Hickory Hill in the golden days of Camelot. You guys, she was 60 years old when she got up on that horse and rode through his house. Let's just have some frank words together. Ethel Skakel Kennedy had mental illness. No one will convince me otherwise. Ethel Kennedy was suffering from mental illness. There is not a 60-year-old who would get up on a horse and gallop through somebody's house and tear up their new renovated kitchen who didn't have mental illness. And the thing is that this was something that she'd been doing her whole life. Riding horses through houses. Not a nature versus nurture thing. This is a mental illness thing. She had problems in her head. Nothing that she's done in her adult life makes any sense to me whatsoever. And do you know why? Because I don't have mental illness, and I cannot understand what she's doing. Having 11 kids so that she could just abandon them and go to parties? All these pranks and foolishness and the tomfoolery and the shenanigans. She's running away from something in her head. But back to her 60th birthday. 2 months after Ted's birthday bash, Ethel marked a major milestone, her own 60th, by throwing a glitzy party. Right. Guests had to pass through an entrance desk marked Ethel Air, where they were handed authentic boarding passes for airlines such as Pan Am, Eastern, and National that directed the passengers to their seats. Each table was named after a country or a city, places Bobby and Ethel had visited during his career, and each of the place cards were genuine airline luggage tags. The airline motif seemed to have nothing to do with the actual theme of the celebration, which was billed as Memorial Costume Party. The guests were required to dress in what they'd worn when they first met Ethel eons ago. Okay. Ethel, how grandiose must you be to think that anyone would remember what they were wearing when they met you? Like, was it such a milestone in their life? I met Ethel Kennedy. And I was wearing the pink mini dress with the white go-go boots. I remember exactly because I wanted to look like Ethel. And I tried to pick out something that Ethel would like. I mean, it's like, who would remember? I don't remember what I was wearing when I met anybody. I don't even remember what I was wearing when I met my husband. Probably something awful. 3 weeks later, after months of planning, Ethel celebrated a more solemn milestone, the 20th anniversary of Bobby's assassination, with a moving candlelight mass of remembrance and rededication at the Arlington National Cemetery. More than 10,000 people attended, many marching across the Memorial Bridge from Washington. They sat or knelt on a great greensward near Bobby's grave, marked by a simple white cross and a stone bearing the words, "Make gentle the life of the world." Not far away flicked the eternal flame near the grave of his brother John. During the ceremony, Ethel, proud and solemn, her face now heavy and marked with the lines of age, sat flanked on the left by Ted, his puffy eyes closed, and on the right by her once troubled son John, now a U.S. congressman from Massachusetts, the first of his generation to be elected to office. Around Ethel sat the 9 other surviving members of her brood, ranging in ages from 19 to 36, many with children of their own. USA Today that weekend called Ethel a quiet inspiration for her children. Quiet? If only. While Ethel didn't speak at the Mass, she did tape a rare, brief interview with NBC's Tom Brokaw. She talked about the last campaign that had cost Bobby his life and about the impact he had had on her children. In closing, she admitted she didn't much like interviews. "I'd rather have another baby," she joked. The ceremony was, to all appearances, a memorial planned and organized by the widow and her family with loving care and devotion. Andy Williams was there to sing his Kennedy standards, Ave Maria and Battle Hymn of the Republic. Altar boys included John F. Kennedy Jr., Christopher Lawford, and Rushton Skakel Jr. No expense, it seemed, was spared to honor the man who had, his brother Ted told the gathering, a restless, morally awakened spirit, something we've missed these past 20 years. For each member of the throng who came to Arlington in the gathering darkness, there was a gift, a souvenir program printed on elegant cream paper stock, emblazoned with Aaron Schickler's 1975 oil painting of Bobby. The program, which included a white silk marker with tassel, symbolized the best of the Kennedys in the minds of those present at the public Mass. Oh yes, this program is going to feature quite prominently in this chapter. In fact, the whole chapter is about this silly program that was handed out as a souvenir. And the drama could only have been created because a person like Ethel was involved with the printing of it. A program for an event really shouldn't be that difficult to throw together. You know what's going to happen in the Mass, and you print it. And then you put a little picture on the front, you slap it together, and you hand it out. And that's how easy it should have been. But no. Listen to the drama that's going to unfold because Ethel was involved in the making of a little program to hand out as a thank you. Months earlier, Ted had approached his friend, Gerald McCanty, international president of the powerful American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME, the largest union in the AFL-CIO. Ted mentioned the forthcoming memorial service and said that he would welcome any help from the union. Over the years, he had been a recipient of campaign contributions, as had untold other senators and congressmen, through AFSCME's Political Action Committee. Not long after, Sabina Parks, the union's art director, was summoned to the executive offices at headquarters, a few blocks from the White House. Parks was instructed to cut into her already busy production schedule to design, lay out, and oversee production of the souvenir program that would be handed out at the memorial mass. The union, she was told, had agreed to pick up the tab. She was told the job wouldn't take her very long, that it could all be done in-house for minimal cost. Parks knew better, but kept her mouth shut. The first stumbling blocks Parks encountered was a difference of opinion between Ethel and her 27-year-old daughter Carrie, who had recently gotten her law degree from Boston College and was helping to run the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Human Rights in Boston. Carrie was helping to organize the event and was writing the Mass. Carrie in Boston and Ethel at Hickory Hill were arguing by phone over virtually every aspect of the project. Recalled Parks. In the middle of the night, they were fighting over which hymn was going to be sung at a particular time. There were battles over the text at 3 o'clock in the morning, with Carrie on the phone in Boston and with me and Ethel's assistant, Caroline Croft, on the phone in my apartment in Washington. I had typesetters in Virginia waiting overnight for delivery. We went through 5 or 6 sets of galleys within a period of 48 hours. Ethel had final approval. Carrie had final approval. And a couple of Kennedy hangers-on had final approval. There were even arguments over the string bookmark. Somebody help me. I tell you this much right now. If I'd been this Parks person and I was up at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4, waiting around for Ethel Kennedy and Carrie to sort of sort out their differences about, the wording of this particular phrase or the font of that particular thing, or whether we should have a string bookmark. What material should it be out of? Should we have it out of silk? Should we have it out of cotton? What should we have it out of? I mean, I would just be like, I don't give a flying what you guys choose to do. You guys can figure this out on your own. Why don't you two march yourselves down to FedEx and figure this out, okay? Got a Kinko's around you? Because I gotta get to sleep. About a week before the Mass, Parks was told to go to Hickory Hill to get Ethel's final approval. Exhausted after weeks of haggling, she was driven out by the union president's chauffeur. Also along was Parks' assistant, a graphics designer from Ghana, whose family had long idolized the Kennedys. I thought it would be exciting for her to meet Ethel, Parks said. Parks and her assistant arrived at the appointed hour and were welcomed into the house by one of Ethel's preppy assistants, who seated them in the living room and left. Well, we know all about the state of the house, but poor Sabina Parks had no idea. She said, "My first impression was one of shock, because the room was so dingy, particularly for someone who had so much money. The furniture was threadbare in places, the rugs were worn, the colors were awful 60s colors, they were faded, it was dingy, it was threadbare, it was somewhat dirty. It was like a lower middle class place, except for the fact that originally the stuff must have been fairly expensive." They had arrived on the dot for the 2:30 meeting with Ethel. And they were still sitting staring at each other at 3 o'clock. Thirsty, Parks had to ask someone for a ginger ale. After another 15 minutes, she went outside to tell the chauffeur, "I don't know what the story is. Just wait a little bit longer." Back in the house, she sat for another 15 minutes, before finally telling another of Ethel's assistants, dressed in a plaid skirt and a Peter Pan-type collar, that she was going to leave if Ethel didn't soon show. Miraculously, Mrs. Kennedy suddenly appeared, in a tennis outfit, Park said. I was very angry, and she picked up on that. I told her we'd been waiting for more than an hour, and then I had to get back to my office, and then I had the union president's driver waiting. Realizing I was pissed, she immediately started pouring on the charm. "Oh, this is so wonderful what you're doing. It's so beautiful," which was just about enough to make me barf. Then she got on the phone and called Carrie while we were sitting in the living room to once again finalize the text. We had to go into layout, and the program had to go to the printer. And now she's going hassling back and forth with Carrie over the Mine Eyes Have Seen the Glory issue. While she was talking, there were 3 or 4 of her little handmaidens standing around, and something came up, and one of the girls said something to Ethel dealing with the context of the actual program. And Ethel yelled at her, snapped back at her, and the girl burst into tears and ran out of the room. After Ethel got off the phone with Carrie, she excused herself. We waited for her for another 20 minutes, but she never came back. Eventually, we just got up and left. In all, the union had spent almost $20,000 to design and print some 15,000 copies of the 20th anniversary memorial program. When the bills came, they were very chagrined, very upset, Park said later. One thing I did do, I managed to get a credit line at the very end of the program that read, "Special thanks to the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFL-CIO, for producing this program. Gerald W. McEnther, International President, William Lucy, International Secretary-Treasurer," along with the union label. Around headquarters, Park said, those on the pro side felt that there was nothing wrong with doing Teddy a favor. Others questioned the high cost. Not long after her final meeting with Ethel, Parks walked into an office and was greeted by a huge flower arrangement, almost funeral in size, with a thank you note. But Ethel's gift didn't change Parks' mind about her experience. It was shocking to me. The Kennedys never put up a penny of their own. My poor little assistant really had a major dose of reality on the Kennedy thing. She came from a country where the people have pictures of Martin Luther King and Jack and Robert Kennedy hanging on their walls. She was outraged over everything. How we were used and abused. She was also offended by the way they were treating this image, this memory of Bobby Kennedy. Despite what had transpired, Sabina Parks attended Bobby's 20th anniversary memorial mass, and like the thousands of others there, she was moved by the ceremony, particularly the words of Ethel's son, the congressman, who recalled a childhood in which he said he and his siblings had been taught to feel compassion for the poor and to challenge themselves to reach higher levels of achievement. On behalf of my family, Joe told the gathering, many now weeping, I want to thank all of you for still caring. 20 years after his death, all of us in our family share with countless others those precious moments of his public life, and those moments seem especially clear as we stand here at his grave tonight. He was a restless, morally awakened spirit, and it is something we have missed these past 20 years. Of course, this memorial ceremony couldn't have just gone off without a hitch. It had to have Ethel rolling around in the background, causing trouble, mayhem, and just generally making an issue out of nothing. Ethel just didn't have anything to do in her life. That's why she could just be on the phone at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4, and expect that other people should be up with her as well. Because that's what her life consisted of. The thoughtlessness, just the grandiose sense of herself, will never not be a shock to me. Because she literally didn't do anything in life except for the fact that she married into a famous family. But she herself had nothing to give. She had never done anything. There was nothing she could pat on herself on the back for and be like, well, I did contribute this to society. Well, I did invent this. Well, I am this famous scientist that discovered X, Y, and Z. Like, she had like zero legitimate reason to feel like everybody should kowtow to her every time she turned around. But she just thought that because she was a Kennedy, she deserved this. Like, where does she think that this allure came from with the Kennedys? Like, what does she think that the Kennedys were really about? That they deserved this much laud and honor every time that she entered a room? I really don't know. Like, what did she even think the Kennedys had done that was this important? I know that they were a big political dynasty, but like, what honestly were their contributions to politics even? I'll never know. Okay. Ethel, Cliff, and Norm. This chapter is our final and last chapter, and Ethel, Cliff, and Norm refers to Ethel having a little starring role on Cheers. At 9 o'clock on the evening of Thursday, December 10th, 1992, millions of couch potatoes flicked their remotes to NBC to watch another episode of the wildly popular Cheers, a show about the lovable, hard-drinking characters of a fictional Boston tavern. Viewers saw the familiar wooden sign, Cheers, established 1895, with its old-fashioned icon of a friendly hand pointing down to the bar. Under the shot, viewers heard the voice of Sam Malone, the recovering alcoholic bartender, ex-Boston Red Sox pitcher, announcing, Cheers is filmed before a live studio audience. The short opening scene, known as the teaser, showed ditzy postman Cliff Clavin and the beer-bellied, slightly disheveled accountant Norm Peterson emerging bleary-eyed from Cheers into the afternoon sunlight. Norm suddenly spots several people standing in front of the bar, one of them a somewhat rotund woman wearing a navy blue blazer jacket and a skirt and sensible heels.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, would you guys like a picture?
Oh, that'd be great. Do you mind?
No.
You sure you don't mind?
Why
Great.
over here?
Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really
Nice
appreciate
to
it.
see you.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
To those at home, she looked nothing like the vivacious, coltish blonde in trendy miniskirts, the chief counsel's wife, the attorney general's wife, the senator's wife, the presidential candidate's wife, whose picture had graced the cover of magazines and the front pages of newspapers through the years, the woman who might have been First Lady. Ethel's appearance on the show, which came at the spur of a moment, had received scant press coverage, even though the NBC media relations people had managed to get into a short press release. Kennedy's cameo on Cheers. Members of Massachusetts' most famous family visit Boston's most famous tavern. Ethel, her son Michael, and his wife Vicki Gifford Kennedy make a cameo appearance in the opening scene of NBC's hit comedy series Cheers this Thursday. For Ethel, who'd seen and done practically everything in her lifetime, getting a spot on her favorite TV show with her favorite characters, Cliff and Norm, was a dream come true. Ethel's appearance came about because of her long friendship with John Pike, a former Boston TV station executive, who is now head of Paramount Television, who produced the show with Charles Burroughs Charles, the program's creators. At her behest, Pike had mentioned Ethel's interest in making an appearance to Cheers, director and co-creator Jim Burroughs. Burroughs was thrilled. In the past, there had been cameos by other famous Massachusetts politicians, Tip O'Neill for one. And for some time, Burroughs had tried to get Ted to make an appearance, but to no avail. The senator, Burroughs assumed, was sensitive about the issue of drinking, despite Burroughs' pitch that the show was about people loving one another, not about alcoholism. But now Burroughs had another famous Kennedy volunteering to be on Cheers. He was overjoyed. "We try to use people who you would believe would be in a Boston bar," Burroughs said. Ethel certainly fit the mold. At the appointed hour, Ethel showed up at the Boston location, the front of the Bull and Finch Tavern, which served as the model for the fictional Cheers sports bar. "She came dressed appropriately, and we fluffed her up a little," said Burroughs, who directed the segment. "So we did 2 or 3 takes, and it took about 20 minutes, and we used the best one. Ethel loved it. She absolutely loved it." For her time, Ethel received the Screen Actors Guild minimum, $466. Burroughs, who'd been in the business for years, was highly impressed with his new find. She played Ethel Kennedy, which is really difficult, because it isn't easy for someone to play themselves. It's hard for someone to be themselves on screen. But Ethel did great. She's a fine actress. Probably because she spent her whole life acting. You know what I mean? Acting happy about this, acting happy about that, acting like everything was going to be okay. How appropriate it seemed that one of the most famous of the Kennedy women, and the best known of the heavy-drinking Skakel clan, would make her network TV sitcom debut on a show about wacky barflies. But Ethel had serious interests, too. By the early 1990s, through the auspices of the RFK Center for Human Rights in Boston, she'd become increasingly involved in human rights causes. This interest included a trip to Namibia with her youngest, Rory, who was attending Brown University. Mother and daughter had visited a sprawling campsite in Windhoek, where hundreds of poor Africans were given basic living needs, a mattress, food, and blankets. "I can't think of anything that has impressed me more," Ethel said at the time. In the town of Dobra, she was photographed holding a black child as she gave singing lessons to the natives. In Nairobi, she presented a human rights award to activist lawyer Gibson Kamau Kuria, who had been held in prison for 9 months after he had filed a lawsuit alleging that the 3 of his clients had been tortured by Kenyan police. In a meeting with President Daniel Mao, Ethel demanded that Kuria be given back his passport, which had been confiscated. Since 1983, when the first RFK Human Rights Award was presented, Ethel and the rest of the family had vowed to stay out of the organization's decision-making process. No pressure, they promised, would be placed on the judges whose decision it was now to honor someone who had struck out against injustice and oppression at great personal risk. Ethel's only role was to help raise funds, arrange for the awards luncheon or dinner, make an occasional fact-finding trip such as the one to Africa, and be there to present the prize, a bust of Bobby, and a check for $30,000. But in 1991, for the first time, a firestorm erupted privately within the Kennedy family over the committee's choice. The judges, Rose Styron, Burke Marshall, Robert Bernstein, Drew Days, and Pat Darien, had selected Raji Sorain, a human rights lawyer. Ethel and the children privately threw a fit when, upon receiving Sorain's background, they discovered that he was a Palestinian from Gaza. In making their choice, the committee members had completely forgotten that Bobby's assassin, Sirhan, had been a Palestinian. For Ethel, the anger she felt in the wake of Los Angeles, an anger that had all but subsided after almost a quarter of a century, suddenly came swirling back. I'm sorry, what is she talking about? They're not giving the award to Sirhan. It's somebody who happens to be from the same country he was. But then she's going to throw an absolute fit because somebody from the same country as the assassin is going to receive the award. How shockingly racist. For all this human rights stuff and like Bobby loved to help people and he really hated racism and, you know, if my husband were here, you know, we're all missing his morally awakened spirit. We've missed it, these 20 years. Yeah, looks like you're missing it right now. I can't even believe that anybody would be kowtowed by her rage either, because it's so misplaced. It's as dumb as if the person who had assassinated her husband had been, I don't know, say like he'd been a German. And then after that, you like had carte blanche on like hating all Germans. Because like, well, there was a German who tried to kill your husband. So now you just get to hate all Germans. Like, that is the most unhinged thing I've ever heard. But all of the judges who chose this guy are going to sit around and be like, oh my gosh, you made such a huge mistake. No, your mistake is second guessing yourself. But anyway, for 2 months, various members of Ethel's family were telling me various reasons why it was not a good idea picking Mr. Sorain, said Rose Styron, a poet, noted human rights activist and a longtime friend of Ethel's. After all, Bobby was killed by a Palestinian. Again, not relevant to this. And this particular man, when he was a student, had belonged to a terrorist organization that had committed a lot of terrorist acts, and he had never renounced them. Okay, now that's a good reason maybe not to choose somebody for the Human Rights Award. That's a legitimate reason. Okay, well, you don't care that much about human rights because you're busy terrorizing the humans, not but a few years ago. So, for real, concentrate your efforts on that. But this business that, well, he was Palestinian and so was the guy who killed her husband, not a relevant point whatsoever. Well, Ethel never said anything directly to me. Others in the family had both political and emotional reasons for not wanting Sorain. The fact is, the judges never thought of it. But in the bosom of the family, there was a lot of feelings about it. The first reaction was it would be politically bad to choose a Palestinian. The gut reaction surfaced later. It must have been there all the time. But we didn't understand it. The minute it was voiced, we all said, oh my God. And that just shows how our heads were stuck in the human rights end. Well, was it? Because you chose a terrorist. But okay. We were being fair and honest and thinking about who was worthy of getting the award and not about the family's feelings. But we should have thought of everything. You should have thought about the fact that a person who was involved in a terrorist organization and never renounced it probably isn't the best person to get the award. I don't know what these judges were thinking. A close family friend said that he had never seen Ethel so livid as when she was told that a Palestinian had won. How could those people, the judges, some of whom I've known and trusted for years, pick someone with that background? It's insane. It's disgusting. It's an insult to me and my children. They're all a bunch of killers, he quoted her as saying. And then he went on to explain. It's the first time in all those years since Bobby was killed that I actually saw the hate Ethel felt for Sirhan. She had never voiced it or showed it, at least to me, till the judges chose that man for the award. Ethel's unhinged. But it's just like Ethel to dislike their choice based on something as dumb as he happens to be Palestinian and so was the guy who killed my husband. Like, Ethel would never know a deeper reason as to why she should, reject their choice. I don't think Ethel probably even realized that he'd been part of the terrorist organization. I think that was, the judges are like, well, potentially that's the issue here. I don't think Ethel even needed to get that deep. I think she's just as shallow as disliking somebody because they happen to be the same race as the person who killed her husband. Rose Styron, however, felt that Ethel had showed considerable restraint in the face of the controversy. She was discreet about our selection, at least with me, Styron said. Carrie and Kathleen were particularly effective and very persuasive in letting their negative feelings be known. We were willing to do whatever the family wanted, including resign, so that we could do something else. But as a family, they worked it out. I don't think it would have gotten resolved if Ethel had said, fine, whatever you want. In the end, 2 awards were given, one to the Palestinian, the other to a Jew, Avigdor Feldman, who was the director of the Litigation Center for the Association of Civil Rights in Israel. Feldman had been originally nominated, but was eventually ruled out by the judges in favor of Sorain. One of the key criteria for selection was that the person's life be at risk. Sorain's was, but Feldman's wasn't. But we added Feldman, Styron said, because we thought that it would make everyone in the Kennedy family feel better. But it made only half of them feel better. The family all rose above it. They all got together, and they did it. They had the ceremony. It was wonderful, and the Israeli was absolutely incredible. As for Ethel, she's got her head screwed on right, at least in anything I'm involved in. This Rose Styron must not know Ethel very well if she thinks Ethel's got her head screwed on right, but whatever. Ethel became entangled in a very public and controversial human rights issue in 1994, this one involving the Irish Republican Army and a highly publicized murder case. Ethel's involvement came because of her daughter Courtney, whose marriage to television executive Jeff Rue had fallen apart in the late 1980s. All efforts by Ethel to bring about reconciliation had failed, and the two were quietly divorced. The fifth in Ethel's brood, Courtney, was the first of Ethel and Bobby's children, the first of the entire new generation of Kennedys, for that matter, to have a marriage dissolve. But she would not be the last. The divorce had left Ethel devastated. Her views about the sanctity of marriage, ingrained years earlier by Big Ann, Rose Kennedy, and the Sacred Heart nuns, had never changed. My wonderful mother would turn over in her grave if she knew her granddaughter had gotten a divorce, Ethel confided to a friend at the time. But Ethel was determined to see her daughter get back on track. Not long after Courtney's divorce, Ethel's son Joe, holding congressional hearings to probe human rights violations by the British in Northern Ireland, introduced his mother to a fascinating young man who had been one of the witnesses. His name was Paul Hill. He was 35 years old and had grown up in the poverty of Belfast Catholic ghetto. He was bright and good-looking. Ethel felt Hill would be a perfect match for Courtney, despite the fact that he was on the epicenter of a political earthquake. Along with 2 other Irishmen and an Englishwoman, Hill had just been released on appeal from a British prison. On the basis of forced confessions, Hill and the others had been convicted for the October 1974 bombing of a pub that had left 5 dead and 50 injured in the town of Guildford, near London. Hill and his compatriots were dubbed the Guildford Four. When Ethel met Hill, a life sentence still hung over his head for another crime, the kidnapping and murder earlier in 1974 of a former British Army soldier, Brian Shaw. During the police interrogation into the bombing, Hill had also confessed to the Shaw murder, but later claimed that the confession had been coerced, and he retracted it. After he was released from prison, he wrote Stolen Years, a book about his prison experiences. Look, y'all, I don't know much about this Hill, but I'll tell you this much right now. If my divorced daughter was looking for a husband, I think I could do better than this person who erroneously found himself trapped by admitting 2 massive crimes to the police. Dang it, don't you hate it when that happens, when the police call you in and you not once but twice get coerced into confessing to a bombing and a murder? Jeez, it sucks when that happens, you know? Ethel believed Paul Hill's story that he'd been framed, became his biggest supporter, and arranged for him to meet Courtney. The couple was soon spotted together in the Irish bars on Manhattan's East Side, where Courtney had an apartment. They quickly became an item, with their romance making the pages of the National Enquirer. Like her aunt, Pat Skakel Cuff, who decades earlier had married an Irishman and settled near Dublin, Courtney tied the knot with Paul Hill in 1993 in a small private ceremony attended by Ethel on a yacht in the Aegean Sea. As for Courtney, this was Hill's second marriage. The newlyweds took up residence for most of the year in Ireland. They got a place in County Clare and began frequenting Dublin's trendy night spots, such as Lily's Bordello, frequented by the likes of the shaved-head singer Sinead O'Connor and Neil Jordan, director of The Crying Game, a film about an IRA member's relationship with a transvestite hairdresser. In 1994, the story of the Guildford Four became the subject of a highly acclaimed film, In the Name of the Father. It gave Hill's side of the story, infuriating many Britons who didn't believe his version of events and who were still seeking retaliation for the murders 20 years earlier. The film made Hill, with his rugged features and shoulder-length hair, into a celebrity, angering some factions even more. But the issue exploded into the front editorial pages of newspapers around the world when, in early 1994, Ethel led the contingent of Kennedys to Belfast to display support and the Kennedy clout. With Ethel was a party of 20, including Joe, Kathleen, Rory, and Carrie, who had merged with another powerful political family when she married New York Governor Mario Cuomo's son Andrew in 1990. Oh, I didn't know that they were married. Interesting. The intersection of these families. In an effort to influence public opinion, the British news media called the Kennedys' involvement rubbish, while the New York Times op-ed page ran a commentary by Rose Styron that asked, "Why hasn't Britain freed Paul Hill?" The Times identified Styron as a writer and longtime member of Amnesty International USA, but not as a pal of Ethel's. When Ethel's contingent arrived in Belfast, Protestant politicians added fuel to the fire by claiming that it was costing taxpayers there about $75,000 a day to guard the Kennedys. One Ulster MP, Ken McGuinness, who claimed to have survived numerous attempts on his life by the IRA, asserted that Ethel and her family were exposing police officers to assassination. They should have arranged their itinerary and accommodations in a better way, he said. One of those seated behind Ethel and her party in the 3-judge Court of Appeals in Belfast was Maureen Shaw, widow of the murdered British soldier. "The Kennedy visit's a joke," the outraged woman declared. "Who are they to come over and try to make an impression? Kennedy is just a name. After all, they've had their scandals as well. I want to see justice done. Paul Hill should be behind bars for the rest of his life." Responding to questions from the press, Joe Kennedy declared, "We're here today to support my brother-in-law in his struggle for justice. Given the history of my family, I also want to let the Shaw family know that we know what it's like to be the victim of political violence. But one wrongful act should not condemn an innocent man for the rest of his life." Standing proudly next to her son, Ethel brushed reporters' questions away and remained mum. But back in the U.S., she told a family friend she was confident that her son-in-law would be vindicated. "Paul's one of us now, a Kennedy. No one pushes a Kennedy around." Finally, on April 21st, 1994, Paul Hill's 15-year nightmare ended when the appeals court overturned his conviction in the Shaw slaying. The judge said his confession was tainted by new evidence that the British police intimidated him with an unloaded pistol after his arrest. The court noted that a confession obtained by improper means must still be excluded even if the court may consider it to be true. In effect, the court emphasized that it was not ruling on Hill's guilt or innocence in its decision. Ethel was at her son-in-law's side when the verdict was announced. Joyful over Courtney's marriage to Paul Hill, Ethel was still heartsick that her daughter's first marriage had ended in divorce. Friends said that she felt ashamed, but Ethel was optimistic and believed that divorce would never happen again to one of her children, that Courtney's situation was a fluke. But then she discovered that Joe's marriage of almost a decade to Sheila Brewster Roch, the mother of his twin sons, was on the rocks, and that he had become involved with Beth Kelly, a pretty one-time temp at his Citizens Energy Corporation in Boston. Beth had become, as Joe put it, the heart and soul of the business, eventually becoming named Director of Special Projects. When Joe won his first election to Congress in 1986, succeeding former House Speaker Tip O'Neill in Massachusetts' 8th Congressional District, Beth followed him to Washington and became Joe's Girl Friday. Of his initial meeting with her, Joe would say, "All I remember is she was someone who could really type and get all the grammar and the punctuation right." Ethel tried to be understanding, but she was livid. When Ethel found out that Joe's marriage to Sheila was in trouble, she was furious, a family friend revealed. She blamed the marriage's failure on him. She called him every name in the book. She said, "Haven't we had enough scandal?" She compared him to his uncle Ted. Ethel rarely spoke negatively about Ted, who were married in 1993. But in the heat of the moment, there was no other analogy she could think of. Joe's marriage had hit the skids in 1990, and Kelly's involvement with a friend of Joe's had fallen apart. As Joe and Beth explained it, they looked up one day and discovered they were in love. "We were both coming off heartbreaking experiences," Joe said. "It brought us closer together." "Oh, how darling for you two. I'm so happy." Joe, I think if I were poor Sheila, the thing that would really drive me to insanity was the fact that it was just so typical. The cute little secretary, you fall in love with the cute little secretary. Like, if you're going to cheat on me, at least be original. Besides Ethel, no one could have been more heartbroken about the breakup of the marriage than Joe's wife Sheila. To make matters worse, while obtaining a civil divorce, Joe had petitioned the Vatican for an annulment so that he could marry Beth in the Catholic Church. Friends said it was Ethel who pushed for the annulment. Now that she had faced the issue of a second divorce in her family, and had seemingly come away weathering the storm, she demanded from Joe that for her sake, his second marriage be in the church. But Sheila was irate and would hear none of it. Going up against Ethel and the rest of the Kennedys, she went public with her feelings, writing an angry letter to Time, which had published a story about Joe's petition under the headline, "Till Annulment Do Us Part." The mention of Joe was part of a larger story about the ease of getting an annulment in the Catholic Church in the U.S., and how displeased the Vatican was about the situation. Written several weeks after Joe announced his engagement to Beth in August 1993, Sheila wrote that she intended to continue to defend the bond that brought my children into the world, even though the odds of prevailing are bleak. If our marriage were deemed never to have existed in the eyes of the Church, then our children, Matt and Joe, would have been neither conceived in nor born to a sanctified union. I find this contention abhorrent and contrary to the Church's teachings. I second that, Sheila. Who is this joker who decided to have an affair with his secretary, and then he wants the Vatican to sign off on it and say it's all okay, so that he can make his conscience feel better? Silly old Joe. The Vatican shoveled its feet on Joe's petition, so he went ahead with the marriage without an annulment. In October 1993, he and Beth tied the knot in a civil ceremony in his home in Brighton, Massachusetts. Then the family, led by Ethel and Ted and his new wife Vicky, sang "When Irish Eyes Are Smiling" as the couple walked up the aisle. Not long before the ceremony, Joe had said, "Beth and I try to achieve a balance between our private and public lives. Sometimes I look at Bill and Hillary Clinton and I can't believe they don't need to spend more time together." Oh, Joe, what you didn't know. All of Joe's brothers and sisters had come to the wedding, including Bobby Jr. and his lawyer wife of 12 years, Emily, mother of his 2 children, Robert F. Kennedy III and Kathleen Alexander Kennedy. Kathleen's middle name had been chosen by Ethel in honor of her sister Georgianne's retarded child. Ethel believed that Bobby and Emily had a happy marriage. At least it appeared that way. But they were having serious problems. In 1992, Ethel was rocked when Bobby told her that he and Emily had quietly gotten a formal separation. They decided to live under the same roof, though, for the sake of the children. However, Bobby soon began appearing in public with another woman, a pretty New York architect named Mary Richardson. In late March 1994, Bobby, an environmental lawyer, flew down to the Dominican Republic and got a quickie divorce. Less than a month later, he married Mary, 6 years his junior, and pregnant. A Roman Catholic Mass had been performed by a New York Supreme Court justice, and the actual ceremony took place aboard a boat in the Hudson River. There was another shock for Ethel, the diagnosis that her sister-in-law Jackie had cancer, and her sudden death at 64 in mid-May 1994. All of it, the 3 divorces, the controversy over Paul Hill, Jackie's death, had knocked Ethel for a loop. By the spring of 1994, having celebrated her 66th birthday, she felt drained. For the first time in years, friends heard her long for Bobby's love, support, and security. Ethel just didn't know how to deal with the situation, said a longtime family confidant. She once again felt in a state of turmoil. She was as confused about what was happening in her life, and to her family, as she had been in that period after the assassination in Los Angeles, and during that terrible time when the boys had gone wild. Now at a point in her life when she should have been feeling content and secure, everything seemed to be falling apart around her. She seemed absolutely crushed. Between the joys and horrors she'd endured all those years with the Skakels and the Kennedys, and her own large brood, Ethel felt that she had been put through the ringer enough. She had no idea what the future held for her. So Ethel did what she always does in the face of adversity. She went to church and prayed. We're done. And I'm not sorry to say it. I mean, I am sort of sorry. It was a good book. But I think I'm ready to talk about other people now. But you guys, Ethel is so shocked and chagrined by life because she doesn't live in reality. So when reality continues to slap her upside the head, even though she's denied its existence all these many years, she's just dumbfounded. Like, what? You guys are getting divorced, but I thought you guys were happily married. How could you think that these people were happily married? Like, it makes me just feel like there was probably like tons of red flags that she was just like, tunnel vision, I don't see it, I don't know it. Because there's no possible way that a person could be getting a divorce and you're just like, what? Out of where, though? When that happened? And she'd lived with those same boys, and they were wild at her house. Did she think that they weren't wild now? And all the things that Emily had to put up with during that relationship. I mean, like just the drugs alone. But of course we know that Bobby was also quite promiscuous during that relationship as well. And if Emily knew anything about that, I mean, how long is she supposed to stay in that? I would really like to know more about Emily because she seems like a very discreet, well-mannered, gracious person. Like, we never hear about any scandal about Emily. She just was doing her best and working hard. And I would love to know more about her, but I've never seen anything written. You never really see any pictures. She just was not a person of scandal, at least as far as I know. All right, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me on this book. I hope that you enjoyed it, and we will find something that we liked just as well as this. I'll talk to you guys soon, and of course there'll be other videos out this week. I'm going to be doing a video on Harry and Meghan and that Vanity Fair piece that completely obliterated them. We're going to read the whole piece together. It's quite long. It's juicy. The person who wrote that was like coming at him with a knife. And it's intense. So look forward to that later this week. Of course, we will have our Friday news roundup, obviously. And just whatever I come up with between now and me finding a book for us to read. So I will see you guys soon. As always, have a great day. Bye.